There is a place where dreams are built in wood and steel, where imagination becomes something you can walk through, touch, see reflected in a child's widening eyes. It begins as an idea, a whisper of possibility, the notion that wonder itself might be constructed, that joy could be engineered, that entire worlds might spring forth from nothing more than vision and determination. Picture a field, an empty stretch of land. Perhaps it sits quiet beneath a pale sky, waiting. The grass moves gently in a breeze that carries with it the faint scent of earth and possibility. There is nothing here yet, only potential, only the space where something extraordinary might one day stand. This is where it always starts, in emptiness, in the moment before creation, when the ground holds no footprints, when the air carries no laughter, when the horizon stretches unbroken and still. But someone stands here, looking out across this blank canvas, and they see something different. They see pathways winding through gardens that don't exist yet, towers rising into air that remains clear and unobstructed. They hear music that hasn't been composed, voices that haven't yet arrived, the echo of joy that exists only in imagination. The history of these places, these kingdoms of make-believe made real, begins long before the first gate ever swings open, long before the first ticket is ever sold. It begins in the space between what is and what could be, in the mind of someone who dared to believe that enchantment was something that could be shared, multiplied, given form. Centuries ago, there were simpler pleasures. Village fairs that appeared with the changing seasons, traveling entertainers who brought wonder from town to town, wooden horses carved by hand, painted in bright colors that caught the light, gardens designed for strolling, fountains where people gathered just to watch water dance in sunlight. These were the seeds, the earliest hints of what would come, small moments of escape woven into the fabric of everyday life. A merchant might set up a curious machine, something that spun or lifted or created the illusion of flight. Children would gather, eyes bright with fascination, and for a moment, just a moment, the ordinary world would fall away. In Copenhagen, in the 1800s, there was a garden, Tivoli. It opened its gates in 1843, and people walked through into something they had never quite experienced before, not merely a garden, but a designed experience. Lanterns hung from trees like captured stars. Stages presented performances that ranged from music to pantomime. There were fireworks that painted the night sky in cascading colors, and everywhere, there was the sense that this was a world apart, a pocket of enchantment carved out of the everyday. This was revolutionary. The idea that pleasure could be curated, that an entire environment could be crafted specifically to transport people beyond their daily concerns. The gardens weren't wild. They were imagined, planned, each pathway leading somewhere intentional, each view composed like a painting, and people came. They walked these paths, sat in these gardens, watched these performances, and something shifted in their understanding of what was possible. Entertainment wasn't just something that happened to you. It could be something you entered into, walked through, became part of. Across the ocean in America, other seeds were taking root. Coney Island, a stretch of shoreline that would become synonymous with spectacle and sensation by the late 1800s. It had transformed from a quiet beach into something wilder, more ambitious. There were mechanical rides powered by steam, enormous structures built purely for the thrill of experiencing them, towers you could climb, wheels that lifted you high above the ground, giving you a view of the world from an angle you'd never known before. The air there smelled of salt water and roasted peanuts, of machinery and excitement. There was a rawness to it, an exuberance. These weren't refined gardens with classical music. These were experiments in sensation, in pushing the boundaries of what the human body could experience and still call fun. But even in that chaos, that carnival energy, there was something being learned, something about how people moved through space, what drew them forward, what made them linger, what made them return. The operators of these attractions were studying human nature, learning to read desire, to anticipate wonder. And someone was watching all of this very carefully, taking notes, imagining something different, something that combined the refinement of the gardens with the excitement of the mechanical rides, something that told stories, that didn't just offer sensation, but meaning, narrative, worlds complete unto themselves. The 20th century was dawning, and with it would come a transformation that empty fields would fill. The quiet spaces would bloom with color and sound and movement, and the places where dreams are built would begin to rise, permanent, substantial, each one a testament to the belief that wonder is not something we outgrow, but something we carry with us, waiting for the right moment, the right place to let it soar once more. The name that would change everything belonged to a man who understood stories, Walter Elias Disney. Born in 1901 in Chicago, raised in a world that was itself transforming, moving from gas lamps to electric lights, from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles, he grew up watching the world reinvent itself, and perhaps that taught him that reinvention was possible, that what seemed fixed could be reimagined entirely. He drew pictures, told stories through moving images, created a mouse that would become more famous than most human beings. But the canvas of film wasn't enough. He wanted something more, something that existed in 3 dimensions, something you could walk through with your own feet, touch with your own hands. In the early 1950s, he began to dream of a place. He called it Disneyland, and it would be unlike anything that had come before. Not a collection of rides scattered haphazardly, not a carnival midway with games of chance and dubious operators, but a complete environment, a story made physical, where every detail served the larger vision. He faced skepticism. The amusement industry looked at his plans and saw disaster. They knew parks. They knew what worked, cheap thrills, mechanical rides, games with prizes. But Disney was proposing something different. He wanted to build a place that was clean, family-oriented, that told stories through its very architecture. And the industry veterans shook their heads. They had seen many things fail, and this seemed destined to join them. The money was difficult. Banks didn't understand the vision. They saw risk without precedent. No comparable model existed, but Disney had something they didn't. He had his television show, and he made a deal. A BC would help finance the park in exchange for a weekly television program, and suddenly the impossible had funding, had momentum, had a path forward. He found land in Anaheim, California. Orange groves stretched across the acreage. The trees stood in neat rows, heavy with fruit. the air thick with citrus sweetness. It was quiet land, agricultural, humble, but he stood there and saw castles, Main Street, rivers carrying boats through jungles that existed only in his imagination. The transformation began in 1954. Bulldozers arrived. The orange trees came down, their removal marking the end of one purpose and the beginning of another. The earth was moved, reshaped. Waterways were dug where no water had flowed before. Hills were constructed where the land had been flat. Reality was being bent to match the dream. And the dream was specific, extraordinarily specific. He had divided this future kingdom into lands, each one a complete environment. Main Street, USA, would evoke small-town America at the turn of the century, a nostalgic vision of a past that perhaps never quite existed but felt true nonetheless. Fantasyland would bring fairy tales to life. Adventureland would offer exotic thrills. Frontierland would capture the pioneer spirit. Tomorrowland would look toward the future with optimism and wonder. The workers who built these lands were creating something unprecedented. They weren't just construction crews. They were called Imagineers, a word that married imagination with engineering, and they had to solve problems no one had faced before. How do you make a jungle in Southern California? How do you create a castle that looks medieval but meets modern building codes? How do you hide the mundane infrastructure that keeps everything running? They developed techniques, forced perspective, made buildings seem taller than they were. The upper stories were built at smaller scales, tricking the eye, making Main Street seem more grand, more dreamlike. They planted trees that would mature quickly, creating shade and atmosphere. They designed drainage systems disguised as streams and waterfalls. Every practical necessity was hidden or transformed into part of the story. Disney himself was there constantly, walking the construction site, adjusting, refining, noticing details others might overlook. If a trash can didn't match the theming of its land, it was replaced. If a sign used the wrong typeface, it was remade. Nothing was too small to matter, because he understood that magic lived in the accumulation of details, that immersion required completeness. The opening was set for July 17th, 1955, and as that date approached, the work intensified. Crews labored through the night, painting, planting, installing. There was so much still unfinished, so much that existed only partially. Tomorrowland was particularly troubled. The future was harder to build than the past. The concrete was still wet in places. Some attractions weren't ready. But the date was fixed. Television had announced it. Thousands of people were coming. Ready or not, the gates would open. That opening day became infamous. They had printed 15,000 invitations, but counterfeit tickets flooded in. Nearly 30,000 people descended on the park, far more than the unfinished grounds could handle. The temperature soared above 100 degrees. Some drinking fountains didn't work yet. A plumber's strike had forced choices, toilets or fountains. They chose toilets. The asphalt on Main Street was so fresh it stuck to women's high heels. A gas leak forced the closure of several attractions. Fantasyland, Adventureland, and Frontierland had to choose which rides could operate. It was chaos. It was disaster. The press called it Black Sunday. But something else was happening too. People were experiencing something they had never felt before, walking into a storybook, seeing characters they had only known from film walking among them, riding boats through jungles that smelled of earth and water, watching animatronic hippos rise from the river's surface, hearing their mechanical roars. Children stood before Sleeping Beauty Castle with their mouths open, not speaking, just staring, trying to reconcile the fact that this thing from their imaginations now stood solid and real before them. Parents found themselves equally transported, discovering that the appeal wasn't just for children, that there was something profound in this act of collective make-believe, this agreement to enter a world where the rules were different, where dragons might be fought and treasure might be found. Despite the disasters of opening day, people came back. They told others. Word spread. This wasn't like other amusement parks. This was something new. Within 7 weeks, 1 million people had passed through the gates. They came from across California, across America, across the world. They waited in long lines under the hot sun, and they smiled. They bought tickets and souvenirs. They ate at themed restaurants. They returned again and again. The park evolved rapidly. Disney kept changing it, adding, refining. He famously said it would never be completed, that it would continue to grow as long as there was imagination in the world, and he meant it. New attractions appeared. The Matterhorn bobsleds in 1959, a mountain that housed a roller coaster with a basketball court, hidden at its peak for cast members on break, the submarine voyage, the monorail, each edition raising the bar, showing what was possible. Other companies watched, studied, tried to understand the formula. How had Disney succeeded where conventional wisdom said he would fail? What was the secret? They saw the cleanliness, the attention to detail, the storytelling, the training of employees, cast members who were taught they were performers, not workers, that every interaction was part of the show, but understanding intellectually and executing practically were different things. Many tried to replicate the model. They built parks with theme, with characters, with stories. Most failed. The gap between concept and execution proved vast. It wasn't enough to have a theme. You had to commit to it completely, had to maintain it, had to believe in it with every nail driven and every bush planted. Six Flags Over Texas opened in 1961. Funded by real estate developer Angus Wynne. It took a different approach, historical rather than fantastical. The park was divided into sections representing the Six Flags that had flown over Texas, Spain, France, Mexico, the Republic of Texas, the Confederacy, the United States, each area themed to its period, with shows and attractions matching the era. It was ambitious, well executed, and it succeeded, but it was different from Disneyland. More regional in character, more focused on thrill rides than immersive environments. It proved there was room for variation, that Disney hadn't exhausted the possibilities, just opened the door. Meanwhile, Disney was already thinking bigger. Florida. He had learned lessons from California. In Anaheim, he didn't control the land around the park. Hotels and businesses had sprung up, some cheap, some garish, breaking the illusion the moment guests left the park boundaries. In Florida, he would buy enough land to control everything, to create a complete destination, a vacation kingdom isolated from the outside world. He began secretly acquiring land in Central Florida in 1963, using dummy corporations to avoid speculation, building a property that would eventually encompass over 27,000 acres, larger than Manhattan, large enough to hold not one park, but many. Hotels, golf courses, an entire resort complex, a city of imagination. But he wouldn't live to see it completed. Walt Disney died in December of 1966, lung cancer. He was 65 years old, and his dream of a Florida project was still largely unrealized. Sketches and plans, models and ambitions, but not yet real. His company faced a choice: abandon the project or push forward without him. They chose to build, to honor his vision, to prove that what he had started was larger than one man. And in doing so, they would create something that would transform Central Florida, transform the theme park industry, transform the way people thought about vacation and entertainment and the places where reality and imagination meet. The work began, the swamps were drained, the land was prepared, and slowly, impossibly, the Magic Kingdom began to rise from the Florida wetlands. Another castle, another Main Street, but bigger, more ambitious, built with all the lessons learned from Disneyland, all the improvements that time and experience had suggested. Walt Disney World opened on October 1st, 1971, and it was vast in a way that defied easy comprehension. The Magic Kingdom alone covered 100 acres, but that was just the beginning. The resort spread across property that could have held San Francisco twice over. Roads wound through carefully preserved wilderness. Lakes sparkled under the Florida sun, and at the center of it all, the park itself waited like a jewel in an enormous setting. The approach was different from California. Guests didn't simply arrive at the gates. They were transported, literally. Parking lots were located far from the park entrance, and visitors boarded either a monorail or a ferry boat, traveling across Seven Seas Lagoon, watching the park grow larger as they approached, the castle rising higher, the anticipation building with every moment. By the time they stepped onto Main Street, they had already left the ordinary world behind. This was intentional, carefully orchestrated. The transition from reality to fantasy needed space, needed time, needed physical distance, and the Florida property provided all of that. You couldn't see highways from inside the park, couldn't hear traffic. The outside world was held at bay by sheer geography, by ownership, by design. Main Street here was larger than its California counterpart, the buildings taller, the street wider, the castle at its end. Cinderella Castle soared to 189 feet, almost twice the height of Sleeping Beauty Castle in Anaheim. It dominated the skyline, visible from almost everywhere in the park, a constant reminder of where you were, what world you had entered. Inside the castle, they had created something unexpected, a restaurant, Cinderella's Royal Table, where children could dine in what felt like a medieval banquet hall. The ceiling arched overhead. Murals depicted scenes from the fairy tale. Cast members, dressed in period costume, served food. And for the duration of a meal, you inhabited the story. You were inside the narrative, looking out through windows at a kingdom spread below. But the innovations went deeper than size and spectacle. Beneath the Magic Kingdom, invisible to guests above, lay the Utilidor, a system of tunnels that allowed cast members and supplies to move through the park without breaking the illusion. A worker dressed as a cowboy from Frontierland never had to walk through Tomorrowland. They could move underground, emerging only in their proper place, their proper time, their proper story. The waste management system was revolutionary. Trash was sucked through pneumatic tubes at 60 miles per hour, whisked away to a central collection point. Guests never saw overflowing bins, never smelled garbage rotting in the Florida heat. The cleanliness that had been a hallmark in California became even more pronounced here, almost supernatural in its consistency. The attention to horticulture reached new levels. The landscape team planted palm trees and tropical flowers, creating lush gardens that looked like they had always been there, but everything was chosen. Nothing was accidental. The colors were coordinated to bloom in sequence, ensuring visual interest throughout the year. The shapes and textures were balanced, creating compositions that would have satisfied a painter's eye. They even controlled the smells. The Smellitzer, a device that could pump specific scents into areas of the park, vanilla on Main Street, salt water near the Pirates of the Caribbean, creating invisible layers of atmosphere, engaging senses that guests didn't consciously notice, but that deepened the immersion nonetheless. And people came, in numbers that exceeded even optimistic projections. 10,000 guests passed through on opening day, but within a year, the annual attendance had reached 10 million. Families saved for months, drove for days, camped in station wagons at rest stops, all to reach this place, this destination that had become synonymous with childhood dreams and family memories. The impact on Central Florida was seismic. Orlando transformed from a quiet citrus town to a tourism capital. Hotels rose from empty land. Restaurants multiplied. Highways expanded. The economy restructured itself around the mouse, around the castle, around the dream. Other companies saw the success and wanted to replicate it, but they also saw the cost. Disney had spent $400 million, an almost incomprehensible sum, building something that couldn't be easily copied. The barrier to entry had been raised enormously. Six Flags expanded, becoming a chain. Parks opened in Georgia, in Missouri, in New Jersey, each one themed differently, but following a similar model. Regional parks with themed areas and increasingly sophisticated rides. They couldn't match Disney's immersive storytelling, but they could offer thrills, roller coasters that pushed the limits of speed and height. And there was a market for that, for pure adrenaline, for the scream rather than the smile. In Ohio, Cedar Point had been operating since 1870, but in the 1970s, it began its transformation into something new, the roller coaster capital. They built the Gemini in 1978, a racing coaster that sent two trains side by side through a course of hills and turns, and they didn't stop. Every few years, a new coaster, each one breaking some record, tallest, fastest, most inversions. The park became a pilgrimage site for thrill seekers, for people who wanted not immersion but intensity. The industry was diversifying, finding niches. Disney owned the family market, the detailed theming, the gentle magic, but others could compete on different terms, on thrills, on regional appeal, on price points that made them accessible to different demographics. In 1982, Disney opened Epcot, experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Walt's vision of a functional city had been transformed into a theme park, but an unusual one, the front half. Future World featured massive pavilions sponsored by corporations. Exxon sponsored the universe of energy. General Motors sponsored the world of motion. Each pavilion was part attraction, part educational experience, part corporate showcase. The icon was Spaceship Earth, a massive geodesic sphere 180 feet in diameter. Inside, a slow-moving dark ride took guests through the history of human communication, from cave paintings to computer networks. The narration was serious, educational, voiced by Walter Cronkite, the most trusted voice in America, lending gravitas to what could have been a simple ride. The back half of Epcot World Showcase featured 11 pavilions representing different countries: Mexico, Norway, China, Germany, Italy, America, Japan, Morocco, France, United Kingdom, Canada, each one staffed by citizens of that nation, serving authentic food, selling native crafts, presenting cultural performances. It was theme park as permanent World's Fair, education disguised as entertainment, or perhaps entertainment elevated by education. Critics were mixed. Some found it corporate, sterile, too educational for children, not exciting enough for adults, but it drew crowds. Millions came to ride the rides, taste the foods, marvel at the ambition, and over time it would be refined, adjusted, made more entertaining, more Disney, but never quite losing that original educational impulse. Disney was proving that theme parks could be more than escapism. They could be battered vehicles for ideas, for cultural exchange, for optimistic visions of the future. And while not every experiment succeeded, the willingness to experiment itself was important. It kept the medium alive, evolving, searching for what else it could be. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, another transformation was beginning. Tokyo Disneyland opened in April of 1983, the first Disney park built outside the United States. It was licensed, not owned by Disney, but built to exacting standards, overseen by Imagineers who ensured that every detail matched the quality guests expected. The Japanese embraced it with an enthusiasm that surprised even Disney. Attendance numbers soared. The park became a cultural phenomenon. Families visited multiple times a year. Young women in particular adopted the parks as a fashion destination, coordinating outfits, collecting merchandise, creating a subculture around Disney that was uniquely Japanese in its intensity and dedication. This international success opened new possibilities. If the model worked in Japan, where else might it succeed? Europe, China. The dream was becoming global, spreading across continents, adapting to different cultures while maintaining core identity. Back in America, Universal Studios was watching Disney's success with keen interest. They had theme park experience. The Universal Studios Hollywood tour had been operating since 1964, taking visitors behind the scenes of a working film studio, showing them sets and special effects. But they wanted more. They wanted a destination resort that could compete directly with Disney. They chose Orlando, building practically in Disney's backyard. Universal Studios Florida opened in June of 1990, and it brought a different sensibility. Where Disney emphasized whimsy and fantasy, Universal leaned into movies, into thrills, into darker themes. Jaws, King Kong, Earthquake. These weren't gentle stories. They were visceral, frightening, exhilarating. The execution was troubled. Many attractions weren't ready on opening day. The Jaws ride in particular suffered constant mechanical failures, breaking down multiple times daily, but Universal persisted, fixing problems, improving systems, and gradually the park found its footing, found its audience, people who wanted something edgier than Disney, something that felt more grown up, more cinematic. The competition pushed both companies to innovate. Disney responded by opening Disney MGM Studios in 1989, their own movie-themed park, featuring attractions based on Star Wars, Indiana Jones, The Twilight Zone. They were fighting for the same audience now, the same tourist dollars, and the guests benefited because competition drove creativity, drove investment, drove both companies to keep building, keep improving, keep imagining new ways to astonish. The 1990s saw an explosion of themed entertainment. New parks opened across America, across the world, each one trying to find its unique angle, its reason to exist in an increasingly crowded market. Some succeeded, many failed. The landscape was littered with ambitious projects that couldn't sustain themselves, couldn't compete with the established giants who had perfected the formulas, who had the intellectual property, the budgets, the expertise. But the successful ones, they were magnificent. They pushed boundaries, combined technology with storytelling in ways that earlier generations could never have imagined. Dark rides incorporated projection mapping. Animatronics became so sophisticated they seemed truly alive. Roller coasters launched magnetically, reaching speeds that earlier engineers would have thought impossible. Inversions and elements that defied gravity, that made riders scream with equal parts terror and joy. The turn of the millennium brought new ambitions, new technologies, and new understandings of what a theme park could be. Islands of Adventure opened in Orlando in 1999, Universal's second gate, and it represented a leap forward in immersive design. The park was built around a central lagoon with 5 islands, each one a complete world unto itself. Marvel's Superhero Island, Toon Lagoon, Jurassic Park, The Lost Continent, Seuss Landing. Walking from one island to another meant crossing a threshold, not just physically but atmospherically. The music changed, the architecture transformed, even the vegetation shifted to match the theme. Tropical plants in Jurassic Park, whimsical twisted trees in Seuss Landing, and the commitment to theming went deeper than Disney had typically ventured. These weren't sanitized versions of their source material. They were full-throated embracements, comic book heroes at actual scale, dinosaurs that roared with genuine menace. The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man opened as the park's flagship attraction, and it changed what people thought dark rides could be. It combined moving vehicles with 3-dimensional sets and screens, projecting computer-generated imagery that seemed to surround riders. Villains appeared to leap from buildings. Fireballs seemed to rush toward you. The vehicle tilted and spun in sync with the action, creating an illusion of movement through space that was breathtaking in its completeness. Guests emerged from that ride blinking, trying to reconcile what they had just experienced. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't a ride. It was something between something new, and it set a standard that would influence attraction design for decades to come. But perhaps the most significant development of this era was still gestating, waiting to transform everything once again. Harry Potter. The books had become a global phenomenon, and film rights had been secured. The movies were breaking box office records, and theme park executives looked at this property and saw possibility, saw potential beyond anything that had come before. Disney had been offered the rights first, but they had passed. Their vision for what a Harry Potter area might be didn't align with what the author, J.K. Rowling, demanded. She wanted complete authenticity, absolute fidelity to her vision. She wanted butterbeer to taste exactly as she imagined it, wanted Hogwarts to be built to proper scale, wanted everything, every detail, to match what readers had fallen in love with. Universal said yes to those demands and began work on what would become the wizarding world of Harry Potter. It opened in Islands of Adventure in June of 2010, and the impact was immediate, seismic, transformative. They had recreated Hogsmeade, the village from the books, with such precision that walking through it felt like stepping into the pages. The shops sold actual merchandise from the wizarding world. Honeydukes offered sweets described in the books. Ollivanders sold wands, interactive wands, that could trigger effects throughout the land if you knew the proper movements, the proper spells. Hogwarts Castle loomed over everything, built at full scale, its towers and turrets reaching into the Florida sky, and inside, the ride, Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, combined robotic arms with projection domes and physical sets in a way that had never been attempted. Riders soared over Hogwarts, encountered Dementors, played Quidditch, all while their bench moved in impossible ways, tilting, rotating, creating sensations of flight that felt genuinely magical. The cultural impact was unprecedented. Attendance at Universal's parks surged. Wait times for the Harry Potter attractions stretched to hours. Guests arrived before dawn, hoping to be among the first to enter, to experience this world they had loved in books and film, now made tangible, made real. Disney noticed, everyone noticed, this wasn't just a successful attraction. It was a new paradigm, proof that if you committed completely to a property, if you honored it rather than simply exploited it, if you gave fans not an approximation but the real thing, they would come in numbers that justified any expense, any effort. The arms race intensified. Disney acquired Marvel, Star Wars, Pixar, amassing intellectual property that could be transformed into themed lands. Universal deepened its partnership with Nintendo, Comcast, with resources to match Disney, fought for every advantage, every edge. Technology advanced rapidly. Projection systems improved, becoming brighter, more realistic, able to create images that fooled the eye even in daylight. Animatronics incorporated more subtle movements, micro-expressions, breathing, blinking. The uncanny valley was being crossed. Figures that seemed genuinely alive rather than mechanical approximations. Star Wars: Galaxy's Edge opened at Disneyland in May of 2019 and at Disney's Hollywood Studios in August of the same year. It was Disney's answer to Harry Potter, a 14-acre land that recreated the planet Batuu, an outpost world on the edge of known space. Every cast member stayed in character. Every interaction was an opportunity for storytelling. The land was set during a specific time in the Star Wars timeline between episodes 8 and 9, and guests were meant to feel like they were living through events, not just observing them. The centerpiece attraction, Star Wars: Rise of the Resistance, was staggering in its ambition. Guests were recruited by the Resistance, captured by the First Order, taken aboard a Star Destroyer. The experience involved multiple ride systems, trackless vehicles, motion simulators, physical sets the size of warehouses, animatronics, projections, practical effects. It lasted nearly 20 minutes, and it told a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end. The cost was rumored to exceed $1 billion for the land, but Disney had learned the lesson Universal taught with Harry Potter. If you build it right, if you commit completely, they will come, and they will keep coming year after year, bringing their children, their grandchildren, making it part of their family tradition. But something else was happening too, a shift in how these places were understood. They were no longer just amusement parks. They had become cultural institutions, pilgrimage sites, places people felt compelled to visit, not once but repeatedly, building traditions around annual trips, seasonal celebrations, special events. Disney created special ticketed events, Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party, Mickey's Very Merry Christmas Party, times when the parks closed early to regular guests and reopened for those who had purchased event tickets, offering special shows, unique character interactions, exclusive merchandise, and people paid premium prices. Not because they had to, but because these events became part of their family's yearly rhythm, markers of time's passage, anchors of memory. The parks had also become increasingly sophisticated in their data collection, their understanding of guest behavior. Magic bands at Disney World tracked every interaction, every purchase, every ride, creating detailed profiles that allowed for personalization, but also for optimization. They knew crowd patterns, could predict demand, adjust staffing, modify wait times. The parks were becoming smart, responsive, adaptive systems that could tune themselves in real time. European expansion brought new challenges. Disneyland Paris opened in April of 1992, and it struggled initially. European vacation patterns were different. Cultural attitudes toward American entertainment were complex. The weather was colder, rainier than Florida or California. Attendance lagged projections. The company lost money for years, but they persisted, refined the offering, added attractions, and gradually it found its audience, became profitable, became beloved. Shanghai Disneyland opened in June of 2016, Disney's first park in mainland China. It was built in partnership with the Chinese government, designed specifically for Chinese guests. Attractions featured Chinese language and cultural elements. The castle was the tallest Disney had ever built. The park incorporated feng shui principles in its design, and it succeeded, drawing millions of visitors, proving that the model could adapt, could respect local culture while maintaining its essential identity. But perhaps the most significant development of recent years came not from expansion, but from interruption. In March of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic forced theme parks worldwide to close. Disney World, Disneyland, Universal, parks across the globe went dark, silent, empty for the first time since they had opened. The images were haunting. Main Street with no crowds, castles reflected in puddles with no one to see them, roller coasters still against empty skies. These places that had been built to hold tens of thousands stood vacant, waiting, and the world felt the absence, felt the loss more keenly than anyone might have predicted. When they reopened, months later, it was different. Capacity was limited, masks were required, social distancing markers appeared on queues, character interactions happened from a distance. The spontaneous moments of connection were mediated by precaution, and yet people came, grateful just to be back, to reclaim something that felt normal, that felt joyful in a time of considerable darkness. The pandemic had revealed something important. These places weren't frivolous, weren't merely commercial enterprises. They served a function in people's lives, psychological, emotional. They were places where memories were made deliberately, where families came together with shared purpose, where the ordinary strictures of life were temporarily suspended in favor of wonder, of play, of imagination made manifest. As the parks fully reopened, as capacity restrictions lifted, as masks came off and characters could once again embrace children, there was a sense of restoration, of something important being returned. The attendance numbers rebounded quickly, surpassing pre-pandemic levels, proving that the appetite for these experiences hadn't diminished. If anything, it had grown, sharpened by absence into something closer to need. And now, in this current moment, the parks continue to evolve. Virtual queues replace physical lines at popular attractions. Mobile apps handle reservations and purchases. Augmented reality overlays digital elements onto physical spaces, creating hybrid experiences that blur the boundaries even further. Technology serves the story, serves the immersion, finding new ways to astonish, new methods of transport. The question that hangs in the air now, suspended like a thought half-formed, is what comes next. Where does this evolution lead? When everything that can be imagined can seemingly be built, when budgets reach into the billions, when technology can create any illusion, any sensation, what new threshold remains to be crossed? What new dream remains to be constructed in steel and stone and light? The answer, perhaps, lies not in what can be built next, but in what these places have always been building, beneath the attractions and the spectacle, beneath the merchandise and the carefully engineered emotions. They have been constructing something more subtle, more enduring, a shared language of memory, a vocabulary of wonder that spans generations. Consider the grandmother who takes her granddaughter to the same park she visited as a child. They walk down the same street, though it has been refreshed, maintained, subtly updated. The experience creates a bridge across time. The grandmother remembers herself young, her own wonder reflected now in the child's face, and the child, years from now, will bring her own daughter, her own granddaughter, creating a chain of memory that links past to future through the simple act of walking through a gate into a designed world. This is architecture of a peculiar kind. Buildings constructed not just in space but in time, designed to persist, to accumulate meaning with each visit, each generation. The park becomes a constant in an inconstant world. While everything else changes, careers shift, relationships evolve, technology transforms daily life beyond recognition, these places remain familiar, reliable, offering the same music, the same stories, the same comfort of predictable magic. The psychology is fascinating. Adults who visit these parks often report feeling something they describe as nostalgia, but it's more complex than simple longing for the past. It's a reconnection with a version of themselves that still exists, dormant beneath the responsibilities and disappointments of adulthood, the part that believed in magic, in possibility, in happy endings. Stepping through those gates gives permission to access that self again, temporarily, safely. And the parks know this. The Imagineers who design them understand they're not just creating entertainment, they're creating vessels for emotion, containers for memory. Every detail is calibrated to evoke, to suggest, to remind. The scent of vanilla on Main Street recalls childhood treats. The sound of a particular musical theme triggers associations built over decades of films and visits. The sight of a castle against the sunset activates something primal, something that responds to beauty and scale and the suggestion of stories. There is craft here that goes unnoticed. The way pathways narrow and widen to control crowd flow while creating moments of compression and release. The way forced perspective makes buildings seem taller, distances seem greater, creating a sense of epic scale within limited acreage. The way color is used, saturated hues in fantasy areas, muted tones in historical sections, each choice supporting the psychological impact of the environment. The seasonal transformations add another layer. Halloween brings pumpkins and fall colors, harvest themes that tap into ancient associations with that time of year. Christmas brings lights, thousands upon thousands of lights, transforming the parks into something even more fantastical. Winter wonderlands in places where winter never comes. The decorations change, but the underlying structure remains, teaching visitors that change and constancy can coexist. That transformation is possible within continuity. But there are shadows in this picture too, questions that deserve consideration. These places are expensive, increasingly so. A family vacation that once seemed accessible now requires significant planning, saving, sacrifice. There is a democratic ideal in amusement, the notion that joy should be available to all. But the reality is more complicated. Admission prices climb, hotel rates soar. The experience becomes stratified. Those who can afford extra services, skip the line passes, concierge experiences, have a fundamentally different visit than those who cannot. The labor practices warrant examination. The cast members who create the magic often struggle to afford living near the parks where they work. They commute long distances, work multiple jobs. The smile they offer is genuine, trained, professional, but behind it may be genuine stress, genuine struggle. The disconnect between the luxury product they help create and their own economic reality creates a tension that occasionally surfaces in labor disputes, in organizing efforts, in quiet resentments. The environmental impact, too. The massive amounts of energy required to run these operations, the water consumed in fountains and attractions, and landscaping in places where water is increasingly precious, the waste generated by millions of visitors, the carbon footprint of travel as families fly from across continents. These are not small concerns, and while companies invest in solar arrays, in sustainability initiatives, in recycling programs, the fundamental model, built on mass consumption and constant growth, presents challenges that technology alone may not solve. And yet, there is something that persists, something that resists easy cynicism. Watch a child meet their favorite character for the first time. See the recognition, the disbelief, the joy that overwhelms them. That's real. Watch a parent cry watching their child experience something they remember from their own childhood. That emotion is authentic, hard-earned, meaningful. These places deal in the currency of happiness. And while happiness can be manufactured, commodified, sold, It remains valuable, remains necessary. Humans need places set apart from ordinary life, need permission to play, to imagine, to believe, even temporarily, in magic, in goodness, in the triumph of heroes, and the possibility of happy endings. The parks serve as modern temples in a sense, secular sacred spaces where people come to perform rituals, to mark occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, the first visit, the 100th visit, each one a marker, a way of saying this moment matters, this experience is worth preserving, worth traveling for, worth the expense and the crowds and the Florida heat, and perhaps that's the deepest magic these places perform. Not the animatronics or the projection mapping or the perfectly timed fireworks, but the permission they grant, the social agreement they facilitate, that for the duration of your visit, you can believe, you can wonder, you can let go of irony and sophistication and simply feel, simply enjoy, simply be present in a moment designed entirely for your delight. The sun sets over the parks, as it has every evening since they opened, the sky painted in colors that seem brighter here, more saturated, whether that's an atmospheric effect or simply attention, simply the willingness to look up and notice. The lights come on, one by one, transforming the environments again. The daytime parks are beautiful, bright, inviting, but the nighttime parks are enchanted, mysterious, lit by warm glows that suggest lanterns from centuries past, by colored floods that paint castles in jewel tones, by tiny white lights strung through trees like captured stars. Music drifts from speakers hidden in foliage, in facades, creating soundscapes that shift as you walk. Adventure gives way to fantasy, gives way to tomorrow. Each transition smooth, almost subliminal. You don't notice the moment it changes, only that the atmosphere has shifted, adapted, guided you deeper into whatever story this particular land is telling. The crowds thin as closing time approaches. Families gather for one last attraction, one last treat. Children fight sleep, wanting to stay to see just one more thing. Parents negotiate, promise returns, future visits. The gates that opened this morning will close tonight, and tomorrow they will open again. The same but different, because different people will walk through, bringing their own expectations, their own dreams, their own capacity for wonder. Somewhere in the parks, a cast member is making magic for the last guests of the evening, staying in character though they're tired, though their feet hurt, though they've answered the same questions 100 times today. They smile, they engage, because they understand their role, understand that for this family, this might be the only visit, the only chance, and every interaction matters, carries weight, becomes part of someone's story. The maintenance crews will arrive soon, after the guests have left. They'll walk the paths with different eyes, looking for trash that needs collecting, light bulbs that need replacing, paint that needs touching up. They'll work through the night, these invisible custodians, ensuring that tomorrow's guests find everything perfect, find no evidence of wear, of use, of the thousands who walked these same paths today. This cycle has repeated for decades now, will repeat for decades to come. Each day, a fresh beginning, each night, a gentle ending. The parks exist in a kind of eternal present, always today, never yesterday, never tomorrow, just this moment, this visit, this experience unfolding in real time. And perhaps that's the final gift these places offer: presence in a world increasingly characterized by distraction, by fractured attention, by the constant pull of devices and notifications and demands. The parks create environments where presence is almost mandatory, where you must be here, now, physically moving through space, experiencing things that cannot be replicated on a screen, cannot be reduced to data, cannot be consumed any way other than being there, walking, looking, feeling. The castle stands against the darkening sky, solid, permanent. Though it was built to look like stone, it's steel and concrete, fiber-reinforced gypsum, modern materials pretending to be ancient, but the pretense is beautiful, meaningful. It suggests that dreams can be solid, that imagination can be structured, that the impossible can be built and touched and photographed and remembered. Fireworks begin, the evening show, explosions of light and color painting the sky, reflecting in water, in windows, in upturned faces, and for these minutes everyone stops, everyone looks up, sharing this moment. Strangers united in collective wonder, in appreciation of the beauty created solely for this purpose: to be beautiful, to inspire awe, to make people gasp and smile and reach for loved ones' hands. The show ends. The crowd applauds, begins to disperse, moving slowly toward exits, tired but happy, carrying bags full of souvenirs, heads full of memories, cameras full of images that will never quite capture what it felt like to be here, to experience this, to live inside the dream for a day. The park's empty, grow quiet, the music softens, becomes background, becomes silence. The lights remain, keeping watch, waiting. Tomorrow they will fill again, with different faces, different stories, different dreams, but the same essential hope, the same desire for magic, for escape, for transformation, for the chance to step outside ordinary life and into something extraordinary, something built, something imagined, something real, and in the stillness, in the spaces between one day and the next, the parks rest, dreaming perhaps of all the dreams they've housed, all the joy they've witnessed, all the memories they've helped create, standing ready, always ready, to open their gates again, to welcome seekers of wonder, builders of memories, believers in magic, back into the worlds where imagination takes form, where stories become places, where dreams, for a little while, come true.